Top of the evening to you.
Hi, Noah.
Noah, I have some sad news. Arlene has been she's in hospice. She's done all the chemo that they can do, and now it's just a matter of time.
Serious reactions can occur. Predicting can lower your ability to fight infections, including TB. Serious infections, cancer, including lymphoma, muscle problems, and changes in certain labs have occurred. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, liver or kidney problems, high triglycerides, or had vaccine or plan to. The TYK2 is a TYK2 inhibitor. TYK2 is part of the JAK protein. It's not known if TYK2 has the same risk that JAK inhibitors. But psoriasis has been high. There's only one TYK2. So answer your question. So clearly you. So TYK2. Dupixent do more with less aspirin. And help create less in as little as 2 weeks. Dupixent is an adult specific types of moderate to severe asthma is not for sudden pain.
Eric, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you make me a co-host?
Right now, I am not host. I'm trying to figure out how to claim host.
Well, let me see. Maybe I'm a co-host. So I'm a participant. Otherwise, you're going to have to keep, unless people are just automatically being admitted into the room. Eric, you're host now.
Yeah, I made you co-host.
Made me co-host? Okay, good. Then if I think people are just automatically being admitted. I don't think we have to admit. Hey, Joe. Oh, you're connecting right now? Hey, Joe Rickard, can you hear me? Unmute yourself, Joe.
Hi. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
good. And yes, and can you turn your camera on?
It's not on?
No, not yet.
Is it on now?
Yeah. I'll give you the go ahead to start. We'll probably wait about, I don't know, 6 or 7 minutes. We still have 3 minutes to 7.
I'm going to do the first part. And then Laurel's going to read under presentation that it is now.
Okay, that's fine.
We're kind of taking
That's
turns.
fine. Okay, that's great. I don't think she has entered yet.
Uh-oh. Y'all, so where is the mute button? Okay.
Well, I'm host, so I'm able to mute everybody.
Okay.
So I think when we start, I'll mute everybody. I'll call on you, you'll unmute, you'll introduce Eric, he'll unmute, and then we'll go. And then I think at the end, if people have any questions or comments, they can just unmute themselves and then ask.
Okay. Just give me a prompter if I'm not
Okay.
doing something.
Yeah, I shall do that. Yep.
Okay.
Eric, you're going to be showing something on the screen?
No, it's just going to be me talking.
Okay.
And am I still on?
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, hi.
Hi, Eric.
Hi, Lori. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How about you?
I'm good.
How's your baby, who's not a baby anymore?
Believe it or not, it's babies plural.
Oh, oh! Congratulations. Oh my goodness. Do you have a little girl? I can't see.
2 little girls, yeah.
2 little girls. Oh, lovely, lovely, lovely. You deserve girls.
Thank you.
What
Whatever
are
that
the ages,
means.
Eric?
Whatever that means. Hi, Noah.
Hey, Lori. Eric, what are the ages of your girls?
Older one is 28 months, something like that. And the younger one is going to be 7 months in a couple weeks.
Oh,
Nice.
are you sleeping? Are you sleeping at all?
As much as I ever was.
Oh, it's wonderful. Nice to hear good news.
Yeah, they're both really sweet.
Oh.
I don't think Laurel has come on yet.
Laurel's here.
Oh yeah, there is Laurel. Okay, hi. There you are. Okay. So we have the tag team in place.
Yes, we do.
Unless I slip under the table.
Yeah. Joe, I think we'll wait a couple of more minutes, okay?
Okay.
And then we'll get started.
Oh, I see, Laura.
My water.
Well, we left balmy Atlanta at 26 degrees to come up to Detroit to see our kids at 1 degree. So although it warmed up today, I think it got below 20. So is it cold in Pittsburgh?
Yes.
It is.
Yes. But not that cold.
Is it snowing also?
Yes.
It's
They're
cold in
expecting-
Florida. It's cold
They're
everywhere.
they're expecting 4 to 6 inches of snow tomorrow.
Yes.
Oh,
How much? Boy,
4
in
to 6.
Pittsburgh.
Yep.
Okay.
My son is near Tampa and it was 48 degrees when I talked to him this afternoon.
That's
It's
cold.
very
Wow. Does the city close down because of all the hills that you have when it snows, or that you have pretty good removal service?
the removal is not good, especially in the city. And no, we don't close down.
Well,
Get
No.
good snow tires.
Well,
Ever
I
since
see Lisa Brill.
COVID,
Lisa and I
we-
are both out of Atlanta, and they closed school at 28 degrees because they thought it was too cold.
Oh my
so,
goodness.
So go figure.
Well, since COVID, I think schools now close more easily around here, and then they have a virtual day because they have the capability now. The kids
Yeah,
probably hate
yeah.
that.
I would think.
Yes, yes. Okay, Joe, do you want to get started and get the program beginning, and then turn it over to Eric?
Okay. Good evening and Happy New Year. I'm Joe Rickard, and Laurel Suzlow is also on, and we are both from Sons of Israel congregation in Du Bois. Hi, Laurel.
Hey, Joe.
And co-chairs for today's program. This is the second program in the 2023-2024 series under the auspices of the Western Pennsylvania Small Congregations Initiative, which brings together 13 congregations from the region. The conveners of this group are the Jewish Community Legacy Project, the JCLP, and the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh. Tonight's program is entitled Small Town Jews and Their Gentile Neighbors, presented by Eric Lidji, backed by popular acclaim for his third presentation to our group. Tonight's program will be recorded, and we will send out the link after the program. Please keep your audio muted throughout Eric's presentation, and you can send questions and comments through the Zoom chat. Laurel?
It is now our pleasure to introduce to you Eric Lidji. Eric was the presenter at the final program, the first program, of the Western PA Small Congregation Initiative. He spoke movingly about the spirit of the regional community, and then last year he spoke about the history of B'nai B'rith in Western Pennsylvania. Eric is the director of the Rauh Jewish Archives at the Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh. He curates its website, the Jewish Encyclopedia of Western Pennsylvania, and hosts its local history podcast, The Cornerstone. He is the author of many books and articles on the Jewish history of Western Pennsylvania. He was also a great help to us when we were closing our building and figuring out what to keep and where it should go after 112 years, I think it was, in our building. So we were really appreciative that some of our things were able to go to the Rauh. So it is now our pleasure to call on Eric.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just going to get my view the way I want it. This is my favorite talk to do by Zoom, because when I look over all of the little squares of faces, I see so many people that I would never get to have in the same room together. And only by Zoom are we able to meet together. When I look at your faces, I have so many good memories of spending time with all of you and getting to know all of you. And I feel so fortunate that I can look out and see all of you and think, wow, like how lucky am I that I got to have this experience to meet all of you. This year marks 10 years since the Rauh Jewish Archives launched its small town Jewish history project. When we launched it, it was under the directive of Susan Melnick, who was my predecessor, and some of you, I'm sure, remember Susan. Over the past decade, we've worked with all of you and with others across our regional community to preserve the legacy of Jewish life in small towns throughout Western Pennsylvania. During the past decade, the archive has preserved 26 congregational collections, as well as dozens of family and business collections from the region. We've created 62 online exhibits and 86 catalog entries. We've conducted more than 40 oral histories, and we've participated in more than 20 public programs, such as the gathering that we're having tonight. And we have a lot of exciting stuff still to come, which I'm going to talk about at the end of my presentation tonight. Over the past decade, I've driven thousands and thousands of miles throughout the region, visiting towns in an area between Erie and Uniontown from north to south, and from Johnstown to East Liverpool, from west to east, or from east to west, I guess. When you drive around, you get a lot of time to think, especially when you hit those parts of Western Pennsylvania where the radio stations start to drop out a little bit. And I've spent a lot of those miles thinking about the state of the country and the state of the Jewish community. And tonight I want to talk about something that's been on my mind, in the back of my mind for the past 10 years. It's something that I think is very consequential for the Jewish community and for the country, but I've really not seen it discussed in a lot of places. And I feel like this is the best forum to talk about it. To introduce this idea, I want to start with a little thought experiment. I want you to imagine a graph. And this is a graph that records every interaction that has ever happened between Jews and their non-Jewish neighbors in Western Pennsylvania. So one end of this graph is marked positive, and the other is marked negative. And every time a Jewish person interacts with a non-Jewish person in this region, the interaction gets logged somewhere along that graph. It's either good or bad or somewhere in the big space in between. So the first thing I want you to do is, as you picture this graph, I want you to notice where in your own mind the bell curve of it falls. Is it right in the middle? Does it lean a little bit towards the positive side? Does it lean a little bit toward the negative side? And then I want you to consider what happens at the ends of the graph. What is the interaction that sits all the way at the positive end? And what's the interaction that sits all the way at the negative end? So for me, the interaction at the negative end is October 27th, for obvious reasons. But the interaction that sits at the positive end is October 28th, which was when so many people came forward and expressed solidarity for the Jewish community. This expression of solidarity surprised a lot of people outside the region. When I've spoken to journalists, a lot of them see it as a completely spontaneous gesture of goodwill among neighbors. And in some cases it was. But I think if you live here, you know that often it was not spontaneous. It was the result of many years and decades of relationships that have been built between Jews and their non-Jewish neighbors. And to my mind, and this is something I didn't know before 10 years ago, is that those relationships are most insightful in the small towns. In most ways, being Jewish in a small town is really not that different from being Jewish in a big city community. There are synagogues in both places. There are religious schools in both places. It's the same Jewish holidays. It's the same Torah. It's the same traditions. But there is one big difference. In a large Jewish community, you can decide if you want to live your life without ever having a deep and meaningful relationship with a non-Jewish person, if that's how you want to live your life. You could just limit it to the checkout counter and the crossing guard, and you could have all your deep, meaningful relationships be with other Jews. But in a small town, you can't do that unless you just want to stay home all the time. The numbers just don't work. The Jews are much smaller population in these smaller communities. There's fewer people, and you're just out among the rest of the community, and inevitably you have deep and meaningful relationships that are formed with non-Jews. When I proposed this topic to Noah last summer, I was thinking that the past decade has been an especially confusing time to be Jewish in America. And now I can make the point even finer, because the past 4 months have been an especially confusing time to be Jewish in America. And sometimes it feels very hard to know where we stand. You hear stories of solidarity, and then you hear stories that feel like betrayal. You hear stories of hatred, and then you hear stories of friendship. To gain insights into the way that Jewish people interact with their non-Jewish neighbors in America, I have long felt that cities would do well to listen to the stories of small towns. That's the best way to understand what it means to exist as a minority without the comfort of numbers. And so what I want to do tonight is provide a survey of those interactions. This is not scientific. There's a lot of documentation available, and whenever there's a lot of documentation, it's very easy to push an agenda and to make things look as good as you want them to look or as bad as you want them to look. These are my impressions that come from hours of listening to you and to people like you over the past decade, as well as my own interest and biases. These are sort of what have stuck in my head over the past decade. And so I'm going to divide this talk into 3 parts. The first is work, the second is clubs, and the third is school. So the primary point of interaction between Jews and non-Jews in small towns, to my mind, was always Main Street. Anybody who regularly bought anything in a small town likely bought something from a Jewish person at some point. The retail community in almost every small town in this region was at one point populated with at least one and often many Jewish merchants. And many of the wholesalers who came through the small towns to supply those merchants were also often Jewish. In a region like ours, where working class people were overwhelmingly involved in heavy industry, especially in the first half of the 20th century, the Jews were different. We were small business owners. So we were having a separate but very interconnected experience. There's actually historic precedent for this in Europe, where the Jews had long served as middlemen between the aristocracy and the peasantry. Transplanted to Western Pennsylvania, Jews became peddlers and then retailers. Their customers were largely the workers at mines and mills and factories that were owned by corporations based out of Pittsburgh. Whatever tensions existed in Europe surely also emerged in Western Pennsylvania as well. I think often about a jeweler I met from Katanning who recalled the dread he would feel as a young man when his father would send him around town to collect overdue bills. He saw himself through the imagined prejudices of his customers. Here was a Jew demanding payment. But overall, the economic context in America was different than Europe, and the recorded interactions that I heard were mostly pleasant. There were always stories of arguments and stick-ups and ugliness, but mostly there were stories of solidarity and camaraderie. There are many, many stories of Jewish store owners who carried non-Jewish customers for long periods of time during strikes or recessions. And there are wonderful stories of Jewish merchants who sold to marginalized groups that no one else would sell to, especially to Black people in these small towns. I was speaking recently with Thomas Wine from Clarion, and he recalled how every year in late summer, his family store would start receiving phone calls from people in all the rural townships throughout northwestern Pennsylvania. And these people were calling to ask when the high holidays would fall that year, because they didn't want to go through the hassle of driving all the way into town only to find that the store was closed. The important part of that story is that tens of thousands of Christians throughout Clarion County knew about the Jewish high holidays. It was casual, widespread knowledge. By the middle of the 20th century, some of these Jewish stores had really become local institutions. The owners became involved in the civic affairs of their communities, like the Chamber of Commerce, the Library Board, the local hospitals, and in some cases, even the city council. Of course, Jews were not only shopkeepers, they also began to enter the professions, and some even held some important posts, like police chief and even mayor in some cases. You can argue that no one did more to advance the cause of unity between Jews and non-Jews in Western Pennsylvania than Mo Rubenstein, who coached numerous high school sports in Ambridge for decades and was revered by generations of athletes in that community. This commitment to civic life created mutual respect in these towns, and the mutual respect created opportunities when things got tough. In the archive, we have a remarkable letter written by Philip Elovich. Some of you may know Marcia Frimmerman in Pittsburgh is her father. He ran Resner Drug Company, which was a successful pharmacy in Sharon, Pennsylvania. And this is a letter that he wrote to the editor of the newspaper there, the Sharon Herald. The letter is dated October 26, 1944. That's pretty late in the war, and it's easy to trick yourself into thinking that by that point, everybody was united in opposition to a shared enemy. But of course, the reality is never so simple. This was just a few weeks before the 1944 election, which was Roosevelt versus Dewey. Roosevelt ultimately won in an electoral landslide, but Western Pennsylvania was very divided at the county level. If you look at a map, you see that Beaver, Allegheny, Westmoreland, Washington, Fayette, and Greene all went for Roosevelt, but everything north of that went for Dewey. If you don't mind, I'd like to read this entire letter because I think it's really special. It says, "Dear Claude, this is not a letter to the editor, but a personal note. The written word, I believe, evokes more thought than the spoken word. Therefore, this letter instead of a personal talk. The majority of the Jewish people in Sharon and Farrell are greatly perturbed at your page 1 editorials. During the heat of a political campaign, many things are said that later are forgotten. That is an American institution. Fight hard, may the best man or team win, shake hands, and cooperate for the good of all. Your editorials, however, we believe are different. There is a note of anti-Semitism, anti-foreignism, and anti-laborism in the way you handle the phrase Sidney Hillman and communism. Need I say that the latter is as distasteful to me as it is to you? However, the tie-in and inferences give the connotation that you must not realize it does. This highlighting and coupling in of a Jewish name in communism, night after night, is an anti-Semitic gesture breeding ill will. Sharon once had in its midst Spencer Warwick, Pelley's silver shirt organizer. He said the same thing. I think in the Herald, I hope, seek to do no harm. So why not fight the Democratic Party as hard as you like, but do not defame an entire segment of the population. I have known you to do many kind things and feel that you desire, as all thoughtful and intelligent Americans do, a helpful hand to those that first suffered so terribly at the hands of Nazism. Claude, I am not writing this at the request of any group. It is merely my own attempt to counsel a friend. As the years creep up on us, you must feel as I do at times, how good to recall the positive, kind gestures instead of wounds inflicted. Sincerely yours, Philip Elovich." That is a letter that is built atop a personal relationship. I cannot say whether the appeal was successful, but measured purely on its humanity, it was undeniably successful. The second major point of interaction between Jewish and non-Jewish people in small towns was club life. I'm using the term club here very broadly to include everything from houses of worship to fraternal associations to charitable institutions. The basic pattern was the same for many small towns. Individuals arrived in search of economic opportunity, but as more and more individuals arrive, they became a community. They started a synagogue, a religious school, a cemetery, and organizations. These organizations were initially intended to serve Jewish needs, the need to pray, to educate children, to bury the dead, to socialize, and to provide for the needy. But over time, some of these organizations expanded their vision, and in addition to meeting the needs of Jewish citizens, they became Jewish representatives for the towns at large. B'nai B'rith Fayette Lodge, number 471 in Uniontown, started its annual sports night program in 1957. And well into the 21st century, the program honored local student athletes. It was non-denominational, and its entire purpose was to create a positive point of contact between the Jewish community and the wider. This willingness to step beyond community lines increased the profile of the Jewish communities within these small towns. As individuals, Jews were never more than 1 or 2 or maybe 3% of the local population. But as a unit, they were a group equal among groups. It was very common in the mid-20th century for a rabbi to be asked to speak at an important civic gathering alongside Catholic and Protestant clergy, as though all three had equal constituencies. In tiny New Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, in 1928, 6 Jewish families in town, that was the entire Jewish population, arranged a union Thanksgiving service with one of the local churches to promote interfaith relations. This impulse to reach beyond the Jewish community was especially strong among Jewish women. By the mid-20th century, each small town had a network of women's clubs undertaking a variety of social, communal, and charitable projects. The local Hadassah, or Council of Jewish Women, or even Congregational Sisterhood, was often included as part of that network. We have in the archive a document from Elwood City, dated 1940. At the top, it says, "These shall be the obligations of the Elwood City section of the National Council of Jewish Women, unless otherwise altered." I'd like to read the list to you. Number 1, in consideration of the services of the rabbi as supervisor of the religious school, we shall donate $100 to the synagogue. Number 2, we shall sponsor a Girl Scout troop and contribute not less than $10 for their camping project. Number 3, we shall be a member of the Chamber of Commerce. Number 4, we shall be a member of the local hospital. Number 5, we shall give an annual treat to the Jewish inmates at Polk Institute. Number 6, we shall contribute to the Hebrew Braille Institute. Number 7, we shall contribute to Ezra's Torah. That was a national Jewish charity. Number 8, we shall contribute to Red Cross and assist them when called upon. Number 9, we shall contribute to the Tuberculosis Fund. Of those 9 obligations, half of them focus on the Jewish community, and half of them focus on the wider civic community. And you can see that same impulse all over. The women in Coraopolis regularly visited the D.T. Watson home. The women in Sharon ran a community thrift shop. The women in Newcastle started a college scholarship fund for the entire community. And finally, I want to talk about children. Even in the larger of the small town Jewish communities, so many respondents reported being the only Jewish child in their class, and sometimes even in their school, or perhaps at most part of a small group. In her memoir, Roses in December, Florence Berman Karp recalls standing with her siblings on the back porch of her home on Washington Avenue in Altoona in the 1920s. She was looking over a distant hillside where the local Ku Klux Klan was burning crosses. I believe that hillside is called Jew Hill still today. Her mother was a survivor of violent anti-Semitism in Europe and was long tortured by the knowledge that many of her beloved relatives were trapped in Europe. Her mother's entire worldview was shaped by those experiences. In recalling those years, Karp wrote, quote, "As small children, we could not have understood the implications of those fiery crosses, but I remember vividly the shuddering fear, the sobering terror we felt when we saw them. We all felt these fears and sort of inhaled them from the air in our house, probably from Mama's behavior and attitudes, if not definite words. Even though no truly anti-Semitic act was ever experienced by any of us, the fear of such a thing was quite definite, at least for me." Those comments to me reflect the experience of many Jewish children in small towns, a general sense of acceptance combined with an overwhelming awareness of difference. While some people reported childhoods filled with harassment, many, many more reported an ongoing state of calm, marred by a few ugly incidents that hung in the mind forever. The sight of a cross burned in a yard, accusations of killing Jesus, a Holocaust joke. The tenor of this changed with the times. The 1920s and 1930s were harder for children than the 1970s and 1980s, which were harder than the 1950s and 1960s. That's obviously a gross generalization. But I think often of a passage from Judith Summerfield's book, A Man Comes from Someplace, which was about her family's journey from Europe to the tiny town of Fredericksville in Fayette County. She wrote, quote, Years later, when I came back to the town to visit old friends, one of our favorite elementary school teachers joined the group. She remembered my father bringing a refrigerator box for the creche. "My kosher girl," she said, "will you ever forgive me for making you take part in the Christmas creche?" She reminded me that I was the narrator of the story of Joseph and Mary and the birth of the baby Jesus. There was nothing to forgive, I told her. We were all included in each other's worlds. This was America. It was a place where Jews could live and not be shot at. This was the triumph, the gift, and I think my father celebrated that every day of his life. He had escaped, and he was safe. In recent years, my childhood friends and I have talked about what it was like living in the town when we were growing up. These are the friends who came to my confirmation at the synagogue in Brownsville, and I went to their churches for special events. We learned about each other's traditions, holidays, and beliefs. Carolyn remembers the matzah sandwiches that my mother made for her at Passover, and years later, when she was teaching elementary school in Ohio, she brought an ecumenical curriculum into her classroom. It was a remarkable moment, we agreed. There was a democratic fervor after the war, and we all felt it. There was a strong belief in the family and in being able to live together and accept difference. We all felt we were part of something larger than ourselves. Over the past decade, I've had the opportunity to witness the closing of many synagogues throughout this region, so much so that sometimes people wince when they see me coming. These occasions are always bittersweet. There is sadness, of course, and the sadness is sometimes tinged with a little bit of guilt, as though the closing represented a failure. And I always try to remind people that the Torah never commanded that there be a Jewish community in any particular small town in Western Pennsylvania. It only commands communal responsibility. And by that measure, the small towns succeeded wildly, because for more than 150 years, everywhere Jews lived in this region, there were Jewish communities that found them. The sadness that I feel is for the towns. Throughout much of the 20th century, almost every American had regular contact with a Jewish person as part of their daily life, either through the stores on Main Street or through clubs or through classmates at school. If you flip through the back issues of almost any small town newspaper in this region, you will find generous and kind-hearted coverage each spring about Passover, each fall about the high holidays, and each winter about Hanukkah. As the Jewish population of small town America gets smaller, the world of that easy interfaith relationships will fade as well. Increasingly, many Americans will have no direct daily contact with Jewish people, and instead, their knowledge will come indirectly. Some of that knowledge will be well-intentioned, some of it will be ill-informed, and some of it will be malicious. As a rule, all relationships need direct human contact in order to attain their highest potential. This year, the Rauh Jewish Archives launched the second phase of our Small Towns project. We will, of course, always continue to collect records, and so if any of you find anything, please give me a call. But we are gradually expanding the focus of this project to include outreach into these small towns. Starting this year, we're using our small town collections. These are the materials that all of you have donated to us over this past decade, to proactively build relationships with public schools, public libraries, and historical societies in small towns. We've already begun partnering with schools to create lesson plans about their local Jewish history. We're currently partnering with schools in Jeanette, Elwood City, and in Braddock. We're also starting to work with historical societies to share inventories so that their researchers know to come to us and so that our researchers know to go to them. I recently had a chance to go to Latrobe, which, as some of you may know, the Latrobe Historical Society is in the former synagogue in Latrobe. And it was a wonderful sight to walk in there after having left the last time with boxes in my hand, to walk in and see the shul full of life, and the ark is still there and the memorial plaques are still on the wall. We're also working with librarians to create talks and maybe even a speaker series, and to create displays that will be intended largely for non-Jewish audiences. The Jewish people have many friends in rural America. I think of the man in White Oak who restored a Jewish cemetery on his own initiative. I think of the care that the Latrobe Historical Society shows to the former synagogue building that it occupies. I think of Norma Ryan, the former mayor of Brownsville, who's taken so much care and love to promote the town's Jewish history. It behooves us to do what we can to nurture these friendships. It's good for the country, and it's good for these towns. And as the old saying goes, it's good for the Jews. We have to instill the sense that we are all part of something larger than ourselves. As current and former residents, you all have a leading role to play in this initiative because you have already built these relationships, and in many cases, you still nurture them daily. So my request is that if you have close contacts with schools or libraries or historical societies or any other key institution in your town, to please let us know so that we can help nurture the sense of a mutual destiny among all people. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions or comments anybody has tonight.
Eric?
Yeah.
Hi, it's Susan Pollock Stein
Hi.
from San Diego. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I was wondering if you had been involved at all in the communities of Altoona or Gallitzin.
Well, Gallitzin, just through your family,
Mhm.
which I don't know if you were the only Jewish family there. There might have been one other, right?
There were other families, at least one that I know of before we were there. There are certainly no Jewish families there now.
Right.
But I don't know what the current status is of the Jewish community in Altoona. I don't know if the synagogue still is functioning. Do you know?
My understanding is that it is still functioning, and I think they even have a rabbi there as well. They're at the outer edge of what we would call Western Pennsylvania, and to date we have not established much contact with them. We have a little bit in the archive, but if anybody has a contact there and could make an introduction, I would love to go out there and meet with them.
The Gallitzin Historical Society is quite active, and they might be interested in doing something.
That would be great. We certainly have a ton of material, thanks to you guys. So I'll get in touch with them.
Eric, hi, Lynn Rubinson.
Hi, Lynn.
How are you? I know we see each other on Zoom and off Zoom. And as always, this was a great presentation. So as you know, I'm originally from Newcastle, and you and Susan did a wonderful job documenting and collecting memories, pictures, what life was like in Newcastle, Jewish life, and what role Jewish merchants played in the economy of the city. But there is a historical society there, and I'm just wondering if you'd ever been in contact with them or if they've reached out to you to include that rich history.
So they've actually been very ahead of the curve on this. We gave a talk to them probably in 2016 or 2017, and they also recently invited the Holocaust Center to come give a talk about survivors in Newcastle. But I think it might be a good time for me to reach back out to them and see what kind of partnerships, even if it's not there's some behind the scenes do. So that's a thank you for that reminder.
And if I can just add a note to people. So I'm on the board at Temple Sinai, and Eric is working with us because we have decided that we do not have the bandwidth or the proper expertise to run to do justice to our archives. And as a result, we are turning, I'd say 90% of our materials, memories, collections over to Eric so that they will be there longer than we will even be here. So I just want to let people know that it's not about the synagogues that have closed, but very often the synagogues that kind of need help making sure that their archives are protected.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. Those records are now at the archive and they're really incredible. Temple Sinai, this is very off topic, but Temple Sinai has a very, very unusual history because almost every other Jewish congregation in Western Pennsylvania was created by a group of people who needed a congregation, and Temple Sinai was created on spec. There was just an understanding that there was a lot of unaffiliated Jews in Pittsburgh who needed a place to be. And it was totally an experiment. And obviously it worked very well because it's still here. But the records document that very explicitly. It's a very interesting story. Jeff, I see your comment in the chat. We do have records from Bradford, and I've written down your email address and I'll get in touch with you.
Eric,
Yeah.
when I was attending Clarion University a number of years ago, they used to have a program for the Holocaust date. And I know that the three colleges, universities have merged together, but that might also be something to reach out to.
Okay, that's helpful to know. We have the Wine family gave us a pretty incredible collection right before they closed. And I've wanted to find a good partner up there. And maybe they've even got some students who would want to help kind of do some initiatives on that. So that's very helpful. Thank you. Perry.
Yeah, I go to the synagogue in Carnegie, which is sort of right outside Pittsburgh. Anyway, I had a rather encouraging experience yesterday. I walk around with an I am a Zionist button, and I'm parking my car in sort of Whole Foods in this more affluent suburb of Pittsburgh, Upper St. Clair. And the man comes to park his car and start to talk about the weather. It's 10 degrees outside. This is terrible. This is that. And he looks at my button, which says, I am a Zionist. And he says, I love your button. Okay. And I was sort of stunned by it because of all the other garbage we're exposed to. So it just shows you that there are a lot of people out there who understand what's going on. Anyway, that's
Thanks,
my
Perry.
vignette.
Yeah, I mean, I think my feeling about it is the challenge is to acknowledge the bad stories and be mindful of them and be on guard without letting it obscure all of the friends that actually do exist. There's never going to be a news article about casual friendships. It's either going to be really bad things or really good things. But in every one of these places, there are people who have positive feelings toward the Jews, or at the very least, no feelings at all, and are just waiting for somebody to tell them how to feel. And it's important not to let the vigilance towards these bad moments blind us to the friends that we have.
Joyce Gendler, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a couple of observations. First of all, say in the last century, they did bar mitzvahs for 2 men who attended Polk School. And the other observation is I used to have a copy of Jake Feldman's book, Jews of Western Pennsylvania. Real informative.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. Lynn, do you have a question or comment?
Hi, thank you. I think this was an awesome presentation. We belong to Beth Samuel Jewish Center in Ambridge, which is the last synagogue in Beaver County where there were so many up along the river communities. But I'm originally from Detroit, in an area that was considered very Jewish. But when I grew up there, I was the only Jewish kid in my class. So that experience has also come with us to this area. And I think there's two things. One thing, Eric, you said, and basically, I think we all understand this. All relationships are personal. If we need that personal connection, because when I was in Ann Arbor and I was working at a job in Ypsilanti, I was working next to somebody who had never met a Jewish person in their life. And they wanted to know where my horns were. And I'm like, what? I was just totally astounded by that. The other thing is that in Ambridge, right after October 27th, I was very concerned about our community, and that, you know, and I mentioned something to our office administrator, said, I'm very concerned about the Ambridge just general area. And they said, oh no, Lynn, you have no idea the support that the Jews and the Jewish community have in the non-Jewish community in Ambridge. And I was just blown away. And I think we need to cultivate it, acknowledge it, you know, understand that everything is not perfect, but move forward, you know, saying, yeah, we do have friends. We do.
Yeah. Thank you, Lynn.
Cantor Michal?
He wants to say something.
Yes, even though Joyce already spoke, Joyce's husband, Professor Steve Gendler, was always the person at Clarion University who was responsible for the Holocaust program. And Joyce, he's been retired, what, 3 years? 2 years?
2.5.
2.5 years, but he probably knows who replaced him. So, no, okay, sorry. I thought that would, you know, help.
I was on the committee of that Holocaust. I'm Phil Turman, a member of the B'nai Abraham Synagogue. If you can hear me there. So I can try, I've retired a couple of years too, but I can try to find out if there's somebody who replaced Steve Gendler. But I also wanted to mention that I don't know, Eric, if you know about the Butler Library is conducting a Yiddish book program. They're partnering. Do you know about this? I don't know if they contacted you.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be speaking in March.
Good, that's what I thought. I thought that's a wonderful non-Jewish Jewish relationship.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of on their committee, and we're going to read 4 books that were written in Yiddish and translated into English, and partnering with the Yiddish Book Center in Amherst.
Yeah, so we got really lucky on this one because we have a memoir that was written in Yiddish by a guy in Butler, and he translated it into English, thankfully. So I'm going to be talking about that.
Great.
And Phil, you've been on my list of people to contact because the other day in the back of shul, somebody pulled out one of your books and we were reading some of your poetry about growing up in Butler. And I made a note that I need to get in touch with you just to talk a little bit more about some Butler history projects. So please expect an email from me at some point soon.
Thanks, Eric. I'm looking forward to it.
I have a question also. My name is Herb Grossman. I live in Butler, Pennsylvania. My family went through Newcastle and also into Baden, etc. I have a family tree which is on a website. I wonder if you have any interest in that, knowing about this.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always interested in family trees, especially in the small towns because people spread across so many towns. We actually just got a really great one recently from Marshall Gordon, if any of you know Marshall. And
yes.
So he's part of this gigantic small town family, the Friedlander Jacobsons. and he just donated a big family tree. It's very helpful because in the future, it saves people a lot of time from having to go find all that information for themselves.
Well, this family tree is already online and has pictures for what I can find.
Okay. So I'm going to have Noah share my email address with everyone afterwards, so anybody who wants to get in touch with me can do so.
Thank you.
Rick DeLoss? Unmute.
Yes, thank you. Eric, this is Rick in Carnegie.
Hi, Rick.
As a historian, obviously, you look to the back and not to the future, but I think your comments are profound that in a lot of the smaller communities, Gentiles are not going to have any exposure to Jews. Do you see anything or do you hear anything that indicates anything that could change that trend? You know, a lot of folks today don't need to live in the city where they work, which might imply that there would be an opportunity for people to live in smaller towns and preserve some of these smaller town Jewish communities. Are you hearing anything at all, or is the trend just all negative?
So this is way outside my area of expertise. And so now that I've given that caveat, I'm going to speak without any particular knowledge, just on my own thoughts on it. If some of you may remember a couple years ago, Amazon did this big charade where they were going to put a second headquarters somewhere, and all these cities got really excited about it, and Pittsburgh was one of them. And I remember thinking at the time that if they chose Pittsburgh, that the city could theoretically become totally unaffordable. And then all of a sudden, all these little towns surrounding Pittsburgh, I was thinking particularly about New Kensington because I had just visited, you know, would suddenly become places where people lived. And I could imagine all of a sudden these communities starting to pop up again. I thought it again during the pandemic because it seemed like people were trying to get out of cities. This new technology was making it possible to work wherever and live wherever. And in many cases, a lot of these small towns are, you know, it's really pleasant. I mean, it's not, you don't have the bustle of the big city, but it just doesn't seem that it's taken on. Some of you may know that White Oak, that one of the synagogues in White Oak essentially did like a homesteading thing where they made a deal that they would pay people a pretty significant amount of money to come live in the community. I think over a period of 5 or 10 years, you know, it was something like, you know, several tens of thousands of dollars. You got enough for a down payment on a house, essentially, and a little living expense. And to my understanding, only 2 people took them up on it. I don't know. I have a thought about it that it's hard to articulate because I don't want it to seem judgmental. But I think that right now, a lot of Jews are very comfortable in an urban environment. And the thought of, if you're observant, the thought of voluntarily taking on the inconvenience of being outside of that communal structure is hard for people. And I think even for people who are not, there's just this sense, a perception of comfort and safety or something along those lines that I haven't quite put my finger on. That makes it very hard for people to imagine living in a smaller town. I recently had to go to Greensburg for some reason. And when I was there, I was thinking, this is such a fun, cool little town. It's like they have this great museum and there's all these cool shops. And there's even a synagogue there. And I was thinking, why don't I live here? And I don't know what the answer is. I don't know why Squirrel Hill has this magnetic pull that makes it so hard to imagine living somewhere else. But I think all over the country, it's that way. The Jews came to these small towns, not because they were quaint, but because they had opportunity. And then they kind of fell in love with them. And then there was this generation. The Jews were so successful that they could send their kids anywhere. The kids could go to college and they weren't bound, and they had the whole world in front of them. And a lot of them took that opportunity. I remember I was talking a couple years ago to, I think his name is Sid Shankin in Newcastle. And he was telling me that he had 4 kids, and like one went to Princeton and one went to, I mean, it was just, you know, he had given his kids the opportunity to do whatever they want, and they took him up on it. And so I really don't know, but America's a strange place, and it's always flipping from what it did in a previous generation. So you never know, maybe it will.
This is Noah. A lot of you know that I'm with Jewish Community Legacy Project. We work with small congregations all over the country, over 100. And we're one of the co-founders of the Western PA Small Congregation Cohort with 13 congregations. We've worked with a number of other congregations that have closed. What we do is we help congregations develop legacy plans. And what's really remarkable is those congregations that close, first thing is they're going to take care of their cemetery, but they've made a conscious decision to endow programs not just for the Jewish community, for the general community as well. So Jefferson Hills, no Jews there anymore, no synagogue anymore, endowed a scholarship program at Thomas Jefferson High School. Every year, a $500 scholarship goes to a deserving senior to go to college, and the legacy of the congregation lives on even though there are no Jews there. Eric mentioned Latrobe. They set up a number of legacy endowments. One is to provide a scholarship for one of the students at Seton Hill University, which is the home of the Catholic Religion's Holocaust Center, to send somebody to Yad Vashem. And you know, the reason why these congregations do this is say, you know, we've left our footprint in the community. Even though we're not here anymore, we feel an obligation to give back to what we've received and the kind of relationship we've had over the years. So it's Eric's comments are very, very telling, and they're reflected in the kinds of legacy endowments, not just in Western PA, but all over the country that we see. Lori Vivio, you were going to say something or ask a question. Please unmute yourself. Lori?
Hi.
There you are.
Can you hear me? I wanted to say two things. First of all, Eric, we do have a pretty active historical society in Monessen,
Okay.
which I'd love for you to be able to get in. I have a contact person that I'll send to you. I'll
Okay.
email her name. The second thing is you gave me a really good idea by talking about, you know, we have not, and no one knows this also, we have not sold our building that housed Temple Beth Am in Monessen. But I was thinking that the Historical Society is outgrowing its tiny little place, and it really gives me a real sense of excitement to think that maybe that could be a wonderful collaborative effort in Monessen. Our building, we have a lovely building, and it's still just sitting there. So thank you for offering, not offering, but talking about somebody who did that. So come on in and do that, Eric.
I would love to come down and meet with the Historical Society. And if you'd like me to make an introduction with the people in Latrobe, if they want to kind of get a sense of how they did it, I'd be happy to do that too.
Wonderful.
Can you remind me what county Monessen is in?
Westmoreland. And so is Latrobe.
Yeah, so, you know, they were able to take advantage of a lot of the foundation support in Westmoreland County, and Monessen might be able to do the same thing.
Yes. And I just wanted to make one more comment when you were asking about, or commenting about the fact that people want to stay in their urban communities. It's really interesting being a Monessen person and still living there. I am one of like 3 Jewish people left in this community. And honestly, I think for me personally, it's a matter of identity. I'm holding on for dear life to my Jewish identity. And it gets harder and harder as people have left this community, because there's nobody to share it with. Now, I'm very lucky. I drive to Greensburg, to the synagogue there, which it's not always real convenient, but I'm very fortunate I can do it. But in answering your question about why people may stay in their communities, their larger cities, I really feel like part of it is a matter of identity, holding on and sharing, because I miss the sharing of my Jewish identity. I share it with as many Jewish and non-Jewish people as I can, but it's something that I do miss. So just a thought.
Yeah, it's very hard to be Jewish by yourself.
And I'm very lucky to have Greensburg.
Yeah.
And Rabbi Sarka's on this call, so that's good.
Oh, hi, Rabbi.
Does anybody have any comments or questions? Anybody else have comments or questions?
It's Elaine Berkowitz. I'd like to say something. I'm not married, so I have no children, but I would think that many people are staying in the big cities because they want their children to meet other Jews and marry Jews. That's what I hear from friends whose family moved when they were young. I think that's a big part.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I just want to say that I find the forum that we're doing here on Zoom very helpful to feel like you're not alone and to see everyone who has signed up. And again, Eric, your delivery of information is just priceless. And we appreciate all that you do.
Thank you, Joe.
Eric,
Any
I'm
final?
getting on. Will I be able to watch it again?
It's
I
being
think we
recorded,
recorded it,
Elaine.
yeah.
I'm sorry?
It's being recorded, Elaine.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll send out the link. Joe, Laurel, you want to close the program?
Sure. Again, thank you, Eric, for such an enlightening and interesting presentation. We look forward to having you back again next year for another stimulating topic. I'm sure one will come to you. This program has been recorded and will be available to everyone. Our next two programs, April 14th and May 16th, will feature presentations from Mike Rothman of Congregation Achim in Carnegie. Mike will provide an entertaining and informative history of the rich and diverse Jewish influence on Broadway. We will send the registration information shortly. Before we conclude tonight's program, we extend our heartfelt support to the people of Israel and pray for their well-being and their victory over the enemies that surround them. Chaim Israel Chai. Thank you for attending. We will see you in April, and good evening. Thank you,
Eric.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Good
Joe.
program.
Thank you, Laurel.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.